Hello, everyone, and welcome to the School Leadership Show. Unfortunately, my energetic co host Mike Dowdy couldn't make it, but I am here, Jen David Lang. Hello. And I get to interview Adam Drummond, the author of The Instructional Change Agent 48 Ways to Be the Leader Your School Needs. Welcome, Adam.
Well, thank you so much. It's so great to be here, and I will try to build that energy and capacity that's missing from your co-host today. So it's going
Yeah.
to be a great show. I'm super excited. Truly an honor to be with you today and look forward to the chat.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming. It's a great book, and we're going to share a lot of really concrete ideas. So, just to start, the names sort of stuck out for me. What exactly is an instructional change agent, and what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, great question. So an instructional change agent is a passionate leader who sees a need and works to make improvement. And I use the word leader very loosely because a leader isn't just a principal. It's not just a superintendent. An instructional change agent can be a teacher. An instructional change agent can be the librarian. It can be a music teacher. It could be a paraprofessional. It could be a custodian. Many of the strategies that you see in the book really are strategies and ways that any educator who's working with kids can make a difference. And when I was a principal, I was hired in as a turnaround school principal and my first principalship. And I was hired to come in and make improvement. And as I worked in my first few years as a leader, I kept looking for a book that was just read it and do it, right? Like I love research. I am the biggest nerd. I actually have a book coming around the science of reading and cannot wait to dig into the research. But principals don't always have that time. Superintendents don't always have that time. Teachers don't have that time to dig into the research. A lot of times we just need the strategy, the what, when, where, how to do it, and be able to go implement it the next day. And so in my mind, back in 2009, 10, 11, I thought someday I'm going to write this book. I didn't know it was an instructional change agent at the time, but I knew it was going to be, here are easy to do ways to improve in X amount of your school. And so it just continued to grow. And as I worked as a principal, it just jotted down ideas. And then I moved into consulting and saw other great things leaders did as well and wanted to bring those celebrations to the surface too.
That's fantastic. Well, that's what people say, right? Is that if we write the books that we wish we had had, those are the best books. They have your passion and your genuine interest. So that's great. And I definitely, when I read it, I was like, oh, this is a read it and do it book. So perfect. Well, you open up the book with a strange anecdote about a student who gets trapped into a wall. And I was thinking, what is this book I picked up? Will you just briefly share the anecdote and what it has to do with being an instructional change agent?
Yeah, for sure. So it was my first day as an elementary principal, brand new, very first day. My son was in kindergarten. He just graduated high school. His party was yesterday. So that gives you kind of some timeline. But coming with me to kindergarten, and if you're an elementary principal, the first day of school, your job is to not lose kids in the morning and not lose kids in the afternoon.
Yeah.
That's it. If you can get from point A to point B, it's a successful day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we got all of our kids to where they needed to go. And I get a call from one of my teachers that asked me to come down to the classroom. And I'm like, okay, this is a little odd. It's been 10, 15 minutes. I'm already being called down to the classroom. And she stands outside of the classroom door and says, Adam, I have a student stuck in the wall. I did ask her to repeat that.
Yeah.
That is certainly.
Hopefully you didn't laugh like I'm chuckling. Hope you
No,
didn't.
it was not a laughing moment.
No.
It wasn't even on the top 1,000 of things that I thought could go wrong on the first day of school, right?
Yep.
And so go in. Of course, I have like 25 other fifth graders just staring at me. And so I'm like, why don't you take some books, go to the extended learning area, courtyard, we'll figure this out. And so I did the only logical thing that I could think of is I called my custodian. And the way the classrooms are, there's cubbies that are really shaped like U's. And so there's cubbies, along the left side, the back, the right side. So in the corner, there's not really a cubby, but what is there is an open gap from where the cubbies were put together. And so this fifth grader literally got behind the cubbies into that gap and shimmied himself all the way up and went behind the cabinets and got stuck and didn't know how to come down. And so my custodian and I literally took cabinets apart. trying to locate him. And this entire time in my head, I'm like, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to have the shortest tenure of a principal ever. It will
And
last
minutes. Yeah.
approximately 75 minutes,
Yeah.
right? And so, of course, I'm also stressed. Is he hurt? Like, you know, is there airflow in the back behind all these? Like, all of these things are going in my head. I'm going to have to call the parents. What are they going to say? Am I going to get sued? Like, just a thousand things going through my mind. And so we finally get him out, get all the boards to the cabinet out, and there he sits, and he's like, "Hi, Mr. Drummond, how are you?" And I think about that question, and I think about the moment, and furious, right? Like that this has happened, relieved that he's okay. One day in the back of my mind, I thought, I will laugh about this. This is not that day.
Yeah.
Stressed, exhausted, just this emotional toll. But what stuck with me was that question, how are you?
Hmm.
And I often think to myself, as instructional change agents and as leaders, do we ask ourselves that question? How are we? Because if we aren't healthy, we're not going to be able to help people.
Hmm.
And I think about my teachers that I work with. When do our teachers ask, how are we? And do we ask that question to our students? And I think that question is really powerful when we take the time to really self-reflect on where we're at, have our kids self-reflect on where they're at, and of course our teachers. Because for a lot of our kiddos, the only emotions they come to school with are happy, sad, and angry.
Hmm.
And there are so many other emotions that impact us that we really do have to take the time to understand how are we, and then how does that impact the work that we do. And so as an instructional change agent, before you can do anything else, you have to mentally set yourself on where are you as a leader? Where do you want to be and how do you get there? And that's really where the book opens
Yeah.
in this first section around culture.
Yeah. Very nice. Wow. We have to reach out to that kid, tell him he made page one of your book. Uh,
Right?
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so it looked like, so the way you organized your book was around four larger areas that school principals should focus on. And I sort of read them as like four levers that a school leader would have to address to truly impact a school. And I was curious why these four areas. So you chose school culture, instructional practices, student engagement, and community engagement. Why those four?
Yeah, great question. So what I did is I took from my own experience and then working with principals, superintendent, teacher leaders, and I literally just started listing what are the things that we do in education. And then I started just theming them, right? Creating these buckets of where we put things in the work that we do. And what I found very quickly is that they really did, for the most part, fit into these four areas around culture, instruction, engagement, and community partnerships. And I'll talk about the order and the intentionality around it. And then there were these leftover things from that list. And I thought, like as leaders, some of these leftover things really do take up a lot of our time, but don't give us a lot of progress or support. And it's not that we don't do them, but we have to de-emphasize that work so we can focus in on other things. And so if we're really an instructional change agent, we're operating at high levels of efficacy and creating the culture that we want, that we are focused in on best instructional practices from the research, that we're really focused in on student engagement, and we know that community partnerships become part of that process. And the order was really intentional because without an effective culture, you're never going to get to instruction.
Yeah.
And part of that culture is not only the relationships the adults have with the other adults, the relationships students have, and the relationships students have with one another as well. And what we know is kids don't learn from people they don't like, right? I didn't make that quote up. That's a well-known quote from another educator. But the reality is perception is reality. So if my students think that I don't like them, it doesn't matter. That's their reality. And so I have to be cognizantly aware of the relationships that I have with kids. And that's really where culture is built. And so you'll see in the first few chapters, I talk about first your own passion, because your own passion shapes the culture of the work that you do. And then we go into visible culture, what we see, hidden culture, what we don't see, but exists underneath the surface. What's the student culture? And then the last chapter, chapter 5, is actually my favorite chapter. And I think it's because I'm very strategic thinking. And it's the future culture.
Mhm.
You know, no one was hired, whether you're a teacher, whether you are a paraprofessional, whether you're a principal or a superintendent, no one was hired and said, I'm so glad you're here. Can you just maintain status quo for us?
That's a great line. Yes.
Right? Like
Right.
no one was hired for that.
Right.
We were hired for the skills and the desire and the passion we have to make improvements. And if we don't set aside that time to think about what does it look like 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, as those leaders, no one else is doing it either.
Love
And
that.
so if we're not doing it and no one else is doing it, how do we move our school or move our district forward?
It's great. Yeah.
And yeah, and so for me, that chapter 5 is like one of my favorite chapters in the book. And then once we got into culture, it really became instruction.
Well, wait, I'm
Uh,
going to pause you there because
Go right ahead.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I like these four areas and I see how they, work together. And it's true, we can't just focus on one. It's like overdeveloping one muscle without the others. You would still tip
Yeah,
over, right?
absolutely.
Or a stool, a four-legged. Usually there's a three-legged stool, but we have a four-legged stool here. So yeah, no, I like the idea of the school culture as a foundation. And I'm wondering if for our listeners who are primarily school and district leaders, if you might share a few of them. So just so to let everybody know, because I summarized the books that we talk about in this podcast, your book has 48 ways or strategies, and I could only summarize some of them. So
Right.
from the school culture, I picked a few. I love the culture walkthrough, the 1 minute listening to every student, some strategies like that. But would you just share one or two of the very specific strategies that our listeners could implement, next week, next school year?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm going to go to one that you just mentioned, which is minute meetings.
Mm,
And this actually came from my counselor. I didn't invent it. She was a new counselor. Her name's Nicole. And she came to me and said, I'd love to meet with every student in our building. We had about 600 kids at the time. And I'm
wow.
like, okay, tell me more. Like, how do you plan to meet with 600 kids?
Yeah, my
And
brain is going to the math as a former math teacher. I'm like,
right.
oh, 10 hours.
And
Okay.
yeah. And she's like, well, I have this idea. And what I'd like to do is just ask really 3 questions. What do you love about school? What don't you like about school? And if you could change one thing, what would it be? Like 3 questions.
Mm,
And I said, okay, so how long will that take? She's like, each are going to be a minute. So I'm going to do 3 minutes with every kid. And I'm just going to do one classroom every day. And so by the end of, the month, I will have visited every classroom. I will have met every child. She used a Google form. So literally she could just type it in, hit submit. The responses jumped into a spreadsheet. She was then able to really sort and look for themes
yep,
and then circle back with kiddos and staff and say, here's what I found.
that's great.
And it was very profound for me because it was something so simple,
Yep,
but it had such a great impact because what happened is every student had a voice.
yep,
And when we think about student culture, it's imperative that we listen to our students and we hear their voices. And it goes back to the question I always ask leaders: do we do school to kids or with kids?
mm,
And there's a big difference with just that little prepositional phrase, right? If
yep,
we're doing school to kids,
yeah,
we're putting that upon them and we're saying we know best. And we're not taking into account to their prior experiences, their passions, what's relevant for them, what do they enjoy about life. Whereas if we do it with kids and with our students,
yep,
we bring their passion into the classroom, we bring their relevancy into the work, and we give them a voice. And so when we give them that voice, they internally say, my teacher cares about me.
yeah.
My
And
school wants me to do well.
what I really like about that, and yeah, we should probably just stick to one strategy for each section because I think that'll really stick out. But it, in contrast to the surveys that we often send out, which you could say does give students a voice, this literally gives them a voice where they get to say out loud in the presence of a school leader, an educator, what. So it's not just what you hear back, but it's the process of feeling listened to that probably has an enormous impact on the
Oh.
culture.
Well, and I would say the other quick piece, whether it's a survey, whether it's a focus group, or whether it's minute meetings, if you don't circle back with the results, and let the students know, or whoever the stakeholder group is that you're working with, they don't see the relevance. And then they do feel like my voice doesn't matter. And then they're less likely to engage in the future. So anytime you're taking a point to collect feedback from a stakeholder, please close that loop
Yep.
back so they see, wow, they really do care. And here's what they told us.
Great. That is great. Yeah, I always say be noisy about the feedback that you took in. All right. So the first area is school culture. The second one is, instructional practices. I think nobody would disagree that that's a huge part of what makes a school strong. So I don't know if you want to pick a favorite strategy from that section that you really saw as helping to move the needle forward when it comes to instructional practices.
Yeah, before I jump right into that,
Yeah.
this was really intentional in being the second
Mm.
of the four sections, because if we don't have high quality instruction, we are not going to be able to access learner engagement. And so for me, I think that that was a really important piece for us to really start to think about, because when we think about instruction, we have to keep our learners in mind. And I always focus back on, are we creating classrooms for our most struggling learners? Because if we create classrooms for our most struggling learners, we also know that every other student is going to be able to activate that learning. And we still need to differentiate a course for all of our students. So I'm not suggesting that we just create this environment for just, a few kids, but we really start to access what does that mean so that all kids have access to that work. And so when we look at instructional practices, I do think it's really important that we spend time really building what does that instruction need to look like for our kiddos. And one strategy that I love in here is the mentor moments where we actually build a strategic process to work with kids. And when we look at how do we build these opportunities, I always talk with school leaders that you have your frequent flyers, you have the folks, the kiddos that you see on a regular basis. Those are the kids that need mentors more than anyone. They're crying out, there's a need there. And so I always say, it doesn't matter to me if it's elementary, middle, or high, the last 10 minutes of the school day is where you can engage with a mentor mentee type relationship. And when we do that, then we're able to really focus in on what does that student need. We're giving them another adult that they can connect into who has zero judgment, right? Classroom teacher has a relationship. I have a relationship. But if I pair that student with the clinic assistant or the nurse at the end of the day, that's somebody that is an equal playing field, right? They're neutral. And they can start to invest and build this relationship.
Is that
And so
something you schedule in your schedule, the last 10 minutes? Yeah.
it is. So the last 10 minutes of the day on everyone's schedule, is wrap up, closure, etc. But then we can go and pull out those X amount of students into this one-on-one conversation. And what we know at the elementary level and middle school level, for example, is when we get to the last 10 minutes of the day, it's often the most chaotic 10 minutes of the day because we're wrapping up, they're getting their supplies, and things just tend to get a little loud. Maybe disorganized at times. And so by pulling out your most at-risk students in that process, you're really able to now focus one-on-one with them and talk about what went well, what could we have done better, what are we going to set the day for tomorrow. The other piece that does is in the instructional period is it allows that student to know there's another adult. And so when that student does something well instructionally, I can say, hey, go down and tell Mrs. Barry the great things that happened just now. Right. So now I have this other positive adult that I can connect into. And so we know from an instructional standpoint, when students have that opportunity to grow and they have that opportunity for affirmation, we want to repeat those behaviors. And so that mentor moment piece is super critical. And I put it in the instructional area because of that, because that is around behavioral instruction, right? And before kids can access academics, they have to be able to, from a social emotional standpoint, to feel connected, to know that there's an adult that cares about them in the school.
And a particularly important strategy now, I think, in this sort of post-ish pandemic time where obviously we know what's going on with kids. So I imagine that that mentoring moment is even more important. And yeah, and I like that interplay that you talk about between student engagement and the instructional practices. And it always seems a bit of a chicken or egg, like, do you build the engagement and then you can build on the instructional practices, or do you build the instructional practices and students see that you're creating a really student-centered, engaging approach, and so they buy more in. So I like that you start with the instructional practices, but then the third part of your book is about that student engagement piece, and that's certainly one I hear is a challenge these days. Attention spans going down. Students are just not engaging, sometimes not coming to school. So yeah, so I liked a number of your strategies in that section. Is there one in particular you might want to share with
Yeah.
our listeners that you liked?
Yeah. So the one that I really, really like, it's way number 31, and it's called Be a Student. And essentially, it's very easy. You literally take a professional day and you follow a student schedule all day long. And you're looking for, how are my students engaging in the school day? And so there's a series of questions, and of course, I can rattle them off, but a couple that I really like in that strategy or that way is, how many times do I see students intentionally interacting with one another? And I like that question for two reasons. One, it's a surefire indicator of engagement. But two, in today's environment, what we know from the World Economic Forum is that they are looking for students who know how to collaborate and who are able to work well with others and are able to solve problems critically. And we don't do that in isolation any longer. If you've been to a manufacturing industry in the last 10 to 15 years, it looks very, very different than it did 20, 25 years ago. And my personal experience, my parents own a sheet metal company, and in college I worked a couple summers there, and I literally could go 6 hours and not talk to another person because I ran a turret. So I took these huge pieces of metal, put it on a machine, hit the start button, cut it out, threw the scrap away, put the part down, pick it up, do it again. That is no longer the case. You walk into their manufacturing industry now, and you will see that same machine now being ran by a robot. But there's a team of individuals who are working to make sure that it's calibrated, that the engineered part of those products are done, that there's quality control. And now it's a team approach. And so even in manufacturing, we're seeing collaboration. And so by being a student in my school day, I can follow a student schedule and I can literally see, how do my students engage? And I think you will be surprised at what you see. There'll be great moments that you'll want to celebrate. And then there'll probably be some moments that you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this is what it was like to be a learner. I guarantee there are kiddos across the country that are sitting in 50, 70, 90-minute classrooms, and they're participating in death by PowerPoint,
Mm-hmm.
where the teacher is up front and literally going through the 72 slides that is content driven.
Yep.
And we have to evolve and we have to change, because that's not what learning looks like any longer. And so being a student for a day gives you the opportunity to really see, what does it look like? And it's a great strategy for everyone, every adult, right? To be
Yep.
able to follow a student schedule and really watch and observe and see.
Yep.
Because if I'm a teacher doing that, I'm going to pick up some really great practices in other classrooms. Or I may pick up some practices that I'm like, yeah, I don't know that I want to do that. And it's about that professional growth. And we're looking specifically at learner engagement. You could certainly modify this way, and you could look at culture. You
Yep.
could look at instructional practices as well. I put it in learner engagement specifically because we want to see how students interact with one another.
Yeah.
And are we intentional in those interactions, or are we just like, hey, it's time to think, pair, share, go find a partner?
Right.
Or are we really being strategic in how we collaborate as well? So it's by far one of my most, I say that and I think about all of them, but it's one of my most favorite strategies, because the implications give you so many opportunities for growth in your school.
It's one of my favorite strategies of all time too. And I think if every school leader, or as you say, even if every educator took even 1 or 2 days a year to be a student or shadow a student, as some people might know it, I think it would truly transform, or at least light a fire under our desire to transform what we see is happening. I did it during the pandemic with my daughter during remote schooling, and she went to a wonderful school, but it was challenging, to see what she
Absolutely.
saw all day. And for the skeptics who say, "Oh, I don't have time for that," I appreciate that you wrote down, I think by doing like a half a day each semester, was it? It's about 2% of a principal's time. So
Right.
yeah, it's hard to argue with the 2%. We probably spend 2%, I don't even know what do we do? Go in the bathroom or surfing Facebook or other things. It's a really well spent 2% of the time.
Well, and I think that's my math background coming into play too,
Oh,
right?
you too. Yeah.
Being able to quantify things.
Yeah.
When you can break it down into those chunks, it
Yeah.
suddenly feels like it becomes more manageable.
Sure.
And one of the challenges I think school leaders have, and rightfully so, is their calendars are really busy.
Yeah.
Get filled really, really quickly. And I always share with school leaders, if you don't own your calendar is going to own you.
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
whole other
yeah,
podcast. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when you're going to plan to be a student, put it
Yeah.
on your calendar early and
Yes.
protect that time.
I love it. There you go, right there, 2 steps. Okay, so for the final section, the community partnership, I was surprised. This is a different area that I don't know that everybody would have in a book about, being an instructional change agent. So, community partnership. So, if I'm a principal in a school, what's something I can do for the next school year to enhance my ability to partner with community people?
Yeah. So here's the deal. If we don't tell our story, somebody else will.
Mm,
My colleague Eric Schinniger shared that quote, and it's 100% true. And so, what we have to do as school leaders is we have to change the narrative of what education looks like and what's happening in our school. And
yeah,
when I became principal of the school that I was at, the reputation was long as a struggling school. It wasn't the school you wanted to be at. And so I made it my commitment to change the perception of what that looked like. And one of the strategies that I utilize that you see in the book is the community walkthrough.
mhm,
And the community walkthrough invites X amount of leaders, 10 to 12 leaders, into the school for a half day. And you break them into 3 different groups or 4 different groups. I mean, you can modify this to make it your own. And they rotate through a series of stations. One of the stations is to look at all of the collateral that you do in communication. So maybe it's your newsletter. It could be parent communication that teachers are sending out. It could be your website. It could be your Twitter or your Instagram page now, your TikTok page for your school. You're looking at all of those communication methods and you're asking them to assess it. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What could you change? And you're really looking at how do we communicate with our stakeholders. Another group that I would recommend is or another station is a tour. So from the moment you walk into the school, what do you feel? What do you see? What don't you notice? What do you notice? One of the things that we found out really on the first year we did it is our folks walked in, I gave them the map, but there was no signage in the building on where kindergarten and first grade was or where fourth and fifth grade was, unless you had the map or you knew the school. Easy fix to
sure.
put those things in play. But it was a way in which people were lost and people were confused. And so by providing a tour, you really see, oh, this is really great. We really like this. Or have you thought about this? Because we're in it every day.
Yeah.
Like it is our home away from our home. Sometimes we spend more time at school than we do our actual home. So having a fresh set of eyes come in and watch and observe and look gives us really great information, again, that we can share out and make some easy changes. And it also shows that we care about what our leaders are saying in the community.
Yes.
Then you can do a third group around a student focus group. Let leaders talk with students in your building. What do they like about school? What makes them excited about learning? What could you change if you wanted to change something about the school? So that's a third area. You could also have them do walkthroughs in classrooms. And what do they see about instruction? You could have them do a teacher group. You could do a teacher focus group. You could interview with the principal. I mean, the sky's the limit on the number of stations you could do. So prioritize them based on what your needs are. Once you're finished, two things. One, make sure you give them swag. That sounds silly,
No,
right?
everybody loves swag.
But they're
Everybody
your
loves swag.
ambassadors,
Yeah, yeah,
right? They will love your school by the end of the visit.
yes,
And you want people to go out and talk positively about your school.
yeah,
And so give them swag, give them a sweatshirt, give them a notepad, give them pens, like whatever your swag is, make sure they get it so you show appreciation. Plus, they can, if it's a sweatshirt, they can wear the sweatshirt out in the community and be proud. But also be very strategic in who you select. Be strategic in influencers in your community. So one of the pieces is we created a school-wide economy, and we had a bookstore that we wanted kids to be able to use their money at. But we also had limited funds. And we wanted to put in there, because I worked in a high poverty school, not only books and notepads and pens and pencils, but deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrush, bars of soap. And so we invited strategically 2 bank presidents to be part of our 10 to 12 groups. We talked about who our school is, and they obviously learned about our school-wide economy. They talked about how do you fund it. That's one of our challenges. And both turned around and gave us $1,000.
wonderful. Yeah,
I mean, $2,000 to a school is a ton of money when you have limited resources.
absolutely.
So you find these.
That's a lot of deodorant.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you find these partnerships and you're strategic, right? You're not manipulative, you're strategic.
No. Yeah.
I bring the mayor in to our community, bring in a former retired principal, bring in the director of the library, bring in, one of the plant managers of a large industry into your school.
Yeah.
If you're at the high school level, look at your pathways and bring in folks for those pathways, right? Look at the 4 E's. Employment. So who are your biggest employers? Enrollment. Who are your colleges, universities, community colleges? Look at your enlistment.
Yeah.
Who from the armed services? And then entrepreneurs, right? That's the 4th E that I talk about. And bring in those entrepreneurs to be part of that community walkthrough.
Yeah.
So really be strategic at who comes to the table. And then the last part of that is turn around and make sure they know what you did.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, send them a follow-up. Your feedback was fantastic. Here's 3 things that we've already done because of your feedback. We so appreciate your loyalty to our school and sharing the great words. Do you mind if I put you on our listserv so you get the parent communication, the family communication that we send out as well?
Right. No, absolutely. I love it. And in the same way that no principal has ever been told, we want you to maintain the status quo. No principal has even, I imagine, entered the principalship with that goal. I am sure most principals do not enter the field because they want to go into marketing.
Right.
And they would be very surprised by this role. But when you hear from you all of these concrete outcomes for students that impact learning, they can see the power in this. And also, unfortunately, the problems when you don't do this, then, like you said, others will write the story. Others narratives will enter the public sphere that you can't control. So I think that 4th area is a really wonderful tip. I want to be sensitive to your time and end it here. If listeners would like to learn more about you or your work, is there any place you would like to send them?
Yeah, for sure. So appreciate that. You can, first of all, I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Adam D. Drummond, and D is for David. If you do just Adam Drummond, you're going to connect with an Australian TV production producer. Great guy. We interacted many, many times because he gets lots of messages from people and sends them my way.
Yeah.
So the Twitter handle is Adam D. Drummond. You can also go to my website, adamddrummond.com. And so that's another way that you can get a hold of me as well. And then, of course, I'm on Facebook, just like most people in our generation. So you can always find me there as well. And happy to help support, problem solve, collaborate, be a listener. Every educator needs somebody who can listen to them and find that person. So, let's find ways to get connected and grow our professional learning network.
Well, thank you so much, Adam D. Drummond, the instructional change agent, 48 ways to be the leader your school needs. Thank you so much for your time, and take care.
Thank you. Appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.